Hello, today is September 4th, 2023, and we'll talk now about Aldo Rossi, the important Italian architect. Here he was. He died in a car accident. He could have lived longer, but I guess fate was brutal with him because of this tragic accident. Nevertheless, he was a force in architecture at the end of the 20th century. And here he is with his wife, a Swiss actress. When he was the first Italian architect to receive the Pritzker Prize in architecture. Some drawings of Aldo Rossi. He drew incessantly and he drew very, very well. And his architectural drawings and sketches and very personal renderings are, I could say, works of art in themselves. Yes, he was very fond of drawing, but he was not shy to publish a book, a scientific autobiography. You wonder about the word scientific. He was an artist through and through, and here he was influenced by Morandi, the great Italian painter. He drew and drew and drew and experimented in various ways. He built many buildings, but drawing remained until he died, an important vehicle for his ideas in architecture. And you can see strange, combination of objects one would expect to find on a table, and then on a table near a cup or a pot, you see fragments from his architecture. Aldo Rossi drawings. This is a rendering for the Modena cemetery. He won the competition, and we are going to see the project in detail. You wonder, could the cemetery be red? Redness being the color of life. But the relationship between Eros and Thanatos, between life and death, is less abrupt as some people might think. Yeah. I like his drawings very much because he was, when he drew in this way, he showed his melancholia, his contemplative side, his poetical side. And, not too many architects do this. Unfortunately, this was a rendering or a study for a complex of housing of apartment buildings in Berlin, which we are going to see. But you see, in his drawings, there is a collage of various images. He's not, timid to include even, horses here in this collage. I wish more architects would experiment with graphic arts the way Aldo Rossi did. But he was also, he was not just a sensuous or sensual, graphic artist. He was also a theoretician, and he wrote very well, and he published books, and his theories about architecture and urbanism are important contributions to modern architecture. So you wonder, his buildings is, here you have his buildings near a pack of cigarettes and a pencil and the Coke. Why not? This is the plan for the Modena cemetery. He won the competition for this cemetery, an important work by Aldo Rossi. Now, buildings and projects. He began, with a different architecture from the one that made him famous. In 1960, he worked with Leonardo Ferrari and built this, thoroughly modernistic building, which I think is quite a good building, but very different from even from the author of the drawings that we just saw. The early works of Aldo Rossi are interesting, and they deserve more attention, I would say. I would say the same thing about, for example, Peter Eisenman. And even Michael Graves, because I think his early works are better than what he did after he achieved success. Here we see some influences from Adolf Loos in the case of Aldo Rossi. Now, a competition for the monument to the resistance in Cuneo. I only have these, images. You can tell that, he was structuring the volume and the aesthetical statement very well, and in an almost minimalist way. So there was a conceptual thinker behind this project. A bridge for the Triennale in Milan in 1964. He was still a young man at that time. A monumental fountain at Segrate in 1965. Here we already see some recognizable or signature elements from Aldo Rossi's work that show up later, and we are going to see what I'm referring to. There is a curious mixture in his work between some kind of I don't know if I should call it innocence, or even an infantile quality in his work that is married to a sophisticated intellect, well-read and well-trained, and this infantile approach to architecture, combined with the sophistication that I mentioned, creates in a way a puzzling architecture. A competition here. I have a very cryptical image. I couldn't read it very well. I mean, here I understand, but I have other drawings. I don't know if here or not. I guess they are not here. Anyway, but this work, which we are going to see later, or here, it's here. It's a very important work in the oeuvre of Aldo Rossi, because Carlo Aimonino invited him to contribute with a housing complex near the one that he was building. So I'm talking about Carlo Aimonino. I think he was a professor, and Aldo Rossi was his assistant. And so they both built a housing complex in Milan, the Galaratese quarter, the Monte Amiata complex, which is a very important work, both for Carlo Aimonino and Aldo Rossi, from 1967 to 1974. Here is Carlo Aimonino, and here is Aldo Rossi. And you are going to see the difference between the two architects and their contribution to this large housing complex in Milan. If you visit Milan, maybe you'll remember to try to visit this complex. This is the contribution by Aldo Rossi, and very different from the one by Carlo Aimonino. So this is Carlo Aimonino, And this on the left is Aldo Rossi. So at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, these were built in Milan. Here you see the face-to-face. On the right, Carlo Aimonino, on the left, Aldo Rossi. And between them, an open space and trees. Now, a design for town hall in Scandicci, 1968. Here we already see insinuations of his, typical Aldo Rossi architecture. You'll understand what I'm referring to if you remember this configuration here. He built a few buildings in this way. I couldn't read this text. So again, this was just a contribution to a competition. Now, this is the cemetery in Modena, which I had the chance to visit. And it was an important work for Aldo Rossi, built between 1971 and 1984. He won the competition for this cemetery. And now you will see images from it. It's not the usual cemetery, it's true. I still think that a good architect takes risks, and he took risks, and he made, this in a way is the city of the dead. Now, in the case of Aldo Rossi, maybe sometimes the distance between the city of the dead and the city of the living is not very great. Some people might argue that his architecture is a little bit undecided sometimes, if it works for Thanatos or for life. In this case, what he proposed was for death. It's a cemetery, but it's a cemetery which is in a way confronting us with the brutality of what death is, the ending of life. And it's not nostalgic about it. What is interesting is that although it is a sensitive work, but its sensitivity is somehow paradoxical, because the language appears to be almost, kind of like neo-rationalism. And you wonder, what's the relationship between, rationalism, neo or without in front of it, and death. But the poetics of the program, the way he interpreted them, are present, and thus it's not a dry architecture lacking sensitivity. It has a certain pointing towards what we call the infinite, the absolute. It is domus eterna. That's what it is. Now, you might like this architecture, or you might not like it. But even the drawings themselves, you look at them, they have a spirit which is not concerned with how to say, sentimentalism, but it is concerned with the gravity of what death is. Sorry about these small pictures. This was one of the drawings that anticipated the building of the cemetery, and I like the drawing very much. And it's a drawing which it is somehow a little bit cryptical. It is clearly graphically stunning. He uses this yellow, which is the color of alertness, of being alert. It is a powerful color, yellow. And so it's not, I mean, most people, thinking about death probably would have used different colors, not blue, yellow, red, black. I mean, these are colors of a certain vivacity. but why not actually respond to this theme in a if not joyous, but in a you know, in a powerful way, even chromatically. So and the builder that he was capable of designing in order to build. And you can see here, it's an architecture that is well structured and well executed and well designed in all the parts. It is a whole, but it is a whole which some people might say it's a little bit I don't know, archetypal, maybe simplistically so. There is a certain ambiguity or ambiguity in the works of Aldo Rossi, I would say. On one hand, the sensualist, the graphic artist; on the other hand, the manipulator of archetypal geometry, and this strange mixture between the scientific mind of the theoretician and the disposition for you know, for the infantile gesture. The design for City Hall, this is a, you know, project he didn't build, but you can see here again the architect was exploring elemental simplicity in order to serve a certain function. You see here at the bottom, you know, what we already saw being built, and he rebuilt it in Milan, a fountain in this way. It was something that obsessed him, I guess. And then again, very simple geometries, primal, no? Primal, but there is this infantile quality in his works that otherwise his architecture could have been very crushing. But because of this, you know, I don't know how to call it, I guess there was also a child in him, scientific or not. The primary school in Fagnano in Olona, 1972, you see, perfectly symmetrical, rigidly so. I mean, Bruno Sevi, the Italian who said that symmetry had no place in modern architecture, would have been very displeased to see this work by his countryman Aldo Rossi, because Aldo Rossi was a modern architect, postmodern or not. He was a modern architect. And yet you see here perfect symmetry. And this is the building. It's a school. Is it you know, a dwarfing school, an authoritarian school? You say that because of its symmetry, it might be. But there is something in his architecture that you know, escapes, I think, the shadow of overwhelming authoritarian spirit. Unfortunately, in this picture, but it wasn't Aldo Rossi who brought these kids together in this aligned and rigid way. No, no. I mean, whoever took the picture assembled the poor kids in this way. I regret. But you see another picture besides this one. Let's see where it is. Here, where all of a sudden the children are dispersed and smiling, and you know, in other words, asserting their you know, childness, as opposed to here where they are choreographed in an alarming way, I would say. Anyway, because his buildings do enough of that. The children should have jumped here and danced and would have. Anyway, that's my opinion. But the building is still interesting despite the rigidity. I don't know what the children felt and feel in this school from 1972 to 1976. a single family homes in Mozzo, 1977. Again, Aldo Rossi, despite the colorful drawings that he made, his architecture is sometimes very strict. But there is that inner child that externalizes himself into his projects, which makes this, otherwise rigid architecture not dwarfing, as I previously said. Teatrino scientifico. I guess he loved the word scientific. 1978. Now, what's scientific about this? He loved the theater. His wife was an actress, and I think his children too, or at least one of them. So theater and film were close to him, and he had imaginings relating architecture to theater, as you can see here. Why he used the word scientific? Maybe behind that word he was hiding maybe an overwhelming sensitivity. I don't know. I'm not trying to say that a scientist cannot be a sensitive person. No, usually you don't associate science with emotionalism. Anyway, you see the kid, the architect is a kid, Aldo Rossi. The floating 250-seat Teatro del Mondo, this is a very important work he did for Venice. Teatro del Mondo and Triumphal Arch, both built for the Venice Biennial in 1979. Teatro del Mondo, which was floating. And these are, drawings, with this Teatro del Mondo that he built. And here it is on the waters of Venice. And here you see Longhena on the right with the famous church that he built, Venetian Baroque. And on the left, Teatro del Mondo by Aldo Rossi, floating. A poetical idea and a poetical building, you could say, is too infantile, too poetical, too ephemeral, or whatever. But what can you build in Venice? Venice itself is very fragile, is vulnerable because of the water, and its beauty derives from its very fragility. And here you see Teatro del Mondo by Aldo Rossi floating on the waters of Venice. And you see here again on the right the massive built work. Here on the left you see a building where Tadao Ando created his only work, as far as I know, in Venice. So Longhena, Tadao Ando, and in between Aldo Rossi on the water. Teatro del Mondo, but life itself is a theater, and we don't know when it ends. A very moving picture. Now, I mean, again, the ephemeral, floating, moving, fragile Teatro del Mondo by Aldo Rossi, and behind, the building where I said, I don't know how it is called, but Tadao Ando was very, very happy and proud to have a chance to create inside this building his only contribution to the architecture of Venice. And here behind again, Longhena. Three excellent architects. Longhena inside this building, the building was not built by Tadao Ando, but inside is his work, and then in front of it, Aldo Rossi. A great picture, a beautiful photograph, showing that, there is poetry in life. There is, if we only have eyes to see it. Now, he was invited in the early 80s to build, well, I guess he won some competitions, but Berlin 3 times during the 20th century invited some of the most important architects of the time to build apartment buildings and houses in Berlin, and they did it in the 1930s. They did it in the 1950s, and they did it in the 1980s. And you are going to see the works built, and he built a lot actually in Berlin, Aldo Rossi, in the 80s, 1980s. I guess we saw already this drawing. And this is the actual work that was built. And we are going to see another large complex of housing units built by Aldo Rossi in Berlin. This one. As you can see, even here, he was not shy to employ, even if you could use such a word, unusual colors, often avoided by architects, but not avoided by Aldo Rossi. The paradigmatic square window, which he used a lot in his architecture, because this is kind of like the window that a child draws. If you ask a child to draw a window or a house, the facade of a house, you know, in most cases, a child would draw a square with a window or two exactly like this. And, you know, the house is cubical, and the window is like what we see here. And that would not be done by the scientific child, no. Anyway, this building was not by Aldo Rossi, but all these are in Berlin. Even here, the octagonal courtyard, and we are going to see another picture here. You see you know, an exuberant red animating some walls. Now, the Torri shopping center in Parma, 1979. Does it look like a shopping center? Not really. But maybe this is something that most good, worthy architects do, that they surprise you. Again, if you see this building from far away and you don't know what it is, I don't think there is much chance that you'd say it's a shopping center. It doesn't look like a shopping center, but that's a good thing that it doesn't look like a shopping center. Inside, okay, we are beginning to feel closer to the function of the building, but outside, now, a middle school in Broni, 1979, not very dissimilar from the school we already saw. Again, he uses here the octagon, and the octagon is important, and the octagon was also very important for Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci didn't build, but he employed in many of his architectural sketches the octagon. The octagon was also used by Bjarke Ingels recently in a project done for Saudi Arabia. So the octagon should stir up our interest. And number 8, beyond the octagon, because the octagon has 8 sides. Number 8, the mysticism of number 8, the symbolism of number 8, they matter too. Anyway, here is the octagon, and within the cylinder, well, I guess he renounced the cylinder. I guess initially he wanted to do a cylinder in the center, but as you can see here, he settled for an octagon. Yes, this is how the building was built. Again, perfectly symmetrical. Totally ignoring Bruno Sevi. I mean, Bruno Sevi in a way was right, but only in a way, because you cannot become dogmatic in the name of modernity, and you shouldn't become dogmatic in the name of anything. So here we have a modern architect who employed symmetrical buildings. and conceive symmetrical being. It is okay. Monumental Tower in Melbourne, Australia was not built 1979. Well, he brought even his, Teatro del Mondo here in his imagination. Maybe he was hoping that the Teatro del Mondo could float all the way to Melbourne. This is the tower he proposed, but was not built. Head office of Pontiveg in Perugia. This was built, office buildings. Again, it's a strange combination between this, archetypal symmetry and archetypal architecture, and with something infantile. And it is exactly this infantilism, if I am to call it so, and I know it could have a pejorative meaning. It is exactly this infantilism which saves the danger of becoming of an architecture becoming too monumental and too rigid, too stiff, and too crushing, too dwarfing. It could have been like this, and it's very close being, in fact. This is a house built in the United States, 1982. He became famous, so commissions arrived to him from across the ocean as well. He taught at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies in New York, the school founded by Peter Eisenman. So he was known to North Americans. But this building, if we look at it, it's very possible, if we didn't know was made by Aldo Rossi, we wouldn't think was made by Aldo Rossi. It could have been built by almost anyone. Now, here we see some cabins from 1982, little cabins for the beach, and a good occasion for him to fantasize again, both in drawing and in built form, because these cabins appear in many of his sketches and his renderings and drawings, graphic works. Another, corporate building, 1984, 1987. Okay, at least it's not the typical glass office building or glass office tower. Aldo Rossi, unafraid to use columns, round columns, but you have to understand the time when he built this. It was, postmodernism's time. It was the time when postmodernism was, asserting the nostalgia and even the fears of those who lived at the end of the 20th century, afraid to step into a new millennium without turning their heads towards the past. And that's what they did. They turned their heads towards the past. Even here, this is a corporate building, right? But the feeling is there is a certain element of playfulness here, even if the geometry is strict and so on. This is a hotel built in Japan, in Fukuoka, 1986, 1989. Here it is. He built another one in Japan. He built two buildings in Japan. I mentioned Peter Eisenman. I think he also built two buildings in Japan, but very different from the ones by Aldo Rossi. I think it's worth thinking about this. Japan had and has, and it seems will have, very, very important architects. And yet they invited architects from other countries, in this case from Italy. They invited Aldo Rossi. And I think this is admirable, that even if they had and have the very important architects, they invited other important architects from other countries. And this shows, an openness towards culture, which I think is very positive. Now, sometimes the drawings are maybe even more seductive than the buildings. That's because, he employed poetical licenses, graphically speaking, in order to enhance whatever interested him. But there isn't actually a great distance between the drawing and the built work. A Lighthouse Theatre in Toronto, 1987. This one I don't find so convincing for some reason. I think here architecture became too much object-like. And in my opinion, a building is more than an object, although there are many architects and important architects who talk about the architectural object. But in my opinion, a building is not an object, it's more than an object. But here somehow you even wonder, is this a model or is it a built work, a built structure, a built building? It is a built work, but there is something about it which makes you think, or which could make one think it's a model. Now, usually we make a model to look like a building and not the other way around, to make a building look like a model. Monument to Sandro Pertini. Here you see again the fountain, the triangular channel that brings water outside in Milan, 1988, 1990. Here it is. And it's in Milan, yes. And here we see echoes from that first school that we saw with this, these steps that people can sit on and, we remember that first school that we saw with aligned poor children in a compact group. Now this is a monument to, Sandro Pertini. I don't know who Sandro Pertini was, but 30 some years ago, ALDO Rossi built this. On one side is this water emerging from the building. On the opposite side of this open air amphitheater. It's a cube essentially. Apartment buildings in Hague, in the Hague, Netherlands, 1989. Again, an impressive structure, an impressive building with an appreciable size, destined for housing in a country which, like Japan, has itself very important architects. Yet they invited ALDO Rossi as well to build here in Hague, the Hague, the Netherlands. The Dutch themselves, builders of important buildings and curious about architecture and inviting excellence, architectural excellence from other countries as well. ALDO Rossi. Now, a residential building and former industrial area in Città di Castello, 1990-1992. Here we see again his signature water channel, which was eliminated or something happened to it in the final work, if I remember correctly. Yes, the triangle is gone, but I don't know what to think about this. I'm not very attracted by this building, because if this is indeed its function is a residential building, you wonder, is this a residence of whom? King Tut? It's like a mausoleum. It's very opaque now. I understand it's maybe protesting against the highway, against the vehicular traffic, protecting the inhabitants, but still, it's a very opaque complex of buildings here. It's a citadel, and I like citadels, but in my opinion, is a little bit too monumental and too almost misanthropic. A clubhouse. Now, a clubhouse is a clubhouse. What can we do? For the rich who can afford to hit a ball for a lot of money that is thrown far away and then run after the ball and so on and so forth. I don't know. It's a golf club. An administrative building at the Walt Disney Company in Orlando, Florida. Even Walt Disney, maybe initially Mr. Disney truly thought of children, but in time, the Disney World became an industry, became a big business, and became a corporation. And here we have it. We have these buildings that mimic innocence, in my opinion, and I would include Aldo Rossi on the list of the guilty ones, in my opinion. Contemporary Art Center in Beaumont-du-Lac in France. Again, what he built for the French, both in Canada and in France, for me is not very inspiring. It's rather, I don't know, predictable, and the infantilis, the architectural infantilis that in some other works balanced the potentialities of an architecture that could have been otherwise very rigid and crashingly. So here, I would say that the infantile elements are, I don't know, that they don't have that balancing power that they have in other works, in my opinion. Maybe he was reluctant to work in French-speaking countries. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud and maybe not thinking very profoundly. It's just that this work, like the one in Canada, doesn't seem to me, and in both cases, it was about the lighthouse. But I don't know, even the lighthouse doesn't seem very, in a way, very serious. Not that the lighthouse has to be, I don't know, maybe I didn't express myself very well, but architecturally, it seems simplistic. A post office and apartments. Well, here I'm contradicting myself, because this work, which I forgot about, is in the City of Music in Paris, and I think is, he honors the French, aesthetics and the French functions, with a mansard at the top. It's still an Aldo Rossi building, but it's a little bit different from the buildings also for housing that he built in the Hague. And I don't know. I mean, here I think there is a balance between gravity and, what I try to approximate with the word infantile. I'm not sure about this corner, though. And now another work in the Netherlands, a museum from 1995. By now, we kind of know the compositions, the architectural compositions of Aldo Rossi. And this one is not in contradiction with what we already saw. An interesting service door, I imagine here, quite, designed, so to speak, for a service door. I imagine it's a service door. a museum in the Netherlands, Aldo Rossi. We see again the octagon within the circle. I guess this is a theme that preoccupied him. And the long staircase here. And you know, this strange interior in that you know, this tower here. I don't know exactly what is happening here. It's possible he didn't do the graphics here. The Netherlands, Aldo Rossi, the Italian architect. And here is the long stair that would require a little bit of stamina to be able to arrive where you want to arrive, that is at the top. Another hotel, I told you, he built two works in Japan, 1996, 1998. Another shopping center in Sardinia. Now, those two white columns probably do not have even a structural function at all. But cryptical as they are, they attract attention. Scholastic Corporation headquarters. We are approaching the end of the presentation. This is a building in Manhattan. It was finalized after he died in that tragic car accident. So 2001 Scholastic Corporation headquarters is the building with the white columns. So something that there is a lot of contextual references here done for the neighbor on this side, meaning this building. I don't know. I mean, you know, if you look at this building and you look at this building, are the, you know, the references from this one to this one so obvious? I don't think they are. But it's a different spirit. But something that, you know, that there are certain, a certain clin d'oeil towards this building. You see here, on the left, we see the columnar facade. Okay, but they are very different, the columns on the left from the columns on the right. Then it says the same colors used, not quite. There isn't much whiteness on the building on the right. Then deeply recessed curtain walls. Well, on the building on the right, they are more recessed than on the building on the left. The construction technique used kit of parts. I don't know exactly what that means. Anyway, somebody thought that the parallelism between the two buildings is very, very obvious. But if a building is about continuity and the break between tradition and innovation, then maybe yes, almost, well, not any building, but a building that deserves to be called architecture tries to negotiate between a certain context and what it wants to assert. So here Aldo Rossi was asserting himself, what he understood for this project that is necessary. And the building near it, interestingly, I mean, yes, this is a famous building, but what about references to the other building? Or maybe he was trying to negotiate between the two buildings, the two neighbors. That might be a possibility too, because we see actually more alignment with the building here on the left side than with the building on the right side. So maybe he was actually trying to, not to pay homage, or maybe even that, more to the less famous building, meaning this building as opposed to this building. Anyway, that was it. So if you want to have a discussion, let's do so.